r/malicious compliance. We can't share a driveway anymore? Fine, enjoy your tiny driveway. When my significant other and I moved into our house some 20 years ago, our neighbors on one side were an elderly husband and wife who we got along with very well. Our two houses shared a driveway that ran from the street to the alley behind the houses, and we each had our own parking area in the back. The driveway was set up so that about 2 feet of it was on our property with the rest on the neighbor's property. The driveway was right up against the neighbor's house and about 8 feet from ours. We all made it a point to not park in the driveway so that we didn't block each other's way, and had no problems for 15 years. Sadly, the sweet neighbors died about 5 years ago and their house was bought by Mike, a man who regularly bought old houses to rent or resell and who clearly didn't care about anything except profit. The first time that we ever met Mike was right after a car had hit our house. The driver had a stroke and lost control of his car while driving down our street. The front of his car was actually inside of our house. So here we are, freaking out because a car is literally sticking out of our house, surrounded by a crowd of onlookers, police, and emergency workers, when Mike saunters over and introduces himself by saying that the whole driveway plus part of our garage are on his property. We tell him that he's wrong, but that this is not the time to discuss it and we'll get back to him later. We do some investigating and discover that the property line is exactly where we knew it to be and that the map Mike was using had the property line overlay off by about 2 feet. Nevertheless, Mike continues to harass us and tell us that we can't use the driveway any longer because he's going to rent the place out and it would be a liability to have us driving on his property. Fine. We'd often talked about putting in our own driveway, so now was as good a time as any. Mike was quite pleased when we told him that, at least he was until he learned that the new driveway was going in right next to his driveway along our property line. He tried to talk us into putting the driveway on the other side of our house, obviously so that he would still have use of the full existing driveway which sat 2 feet onto our property. The look on Mike's face when he saw where the surveyor drew our property line was absolutely priceless. The line left just barely enough room for a car to fit on his side, and he couldn't widen his driveway because it already ran right next to his house. So we used a chunk of our lawn on that side to install a nice wide driveway with river stone gravel so that it would be obvious where our driveway ended and Mike's very narrow blacktop driveway began. Mike never spoke to us again. Edit. To answer a few questions, Mike rented the house to a nice family with kids shortly after we put the driveway in. They bought the house from Mike last year and we get along great. I give them produce, milk, and eggs whenever I have extras, and her kids are very polite. Their driveway is still wide enough to drive through, and they just park in the spaces at the back of their house, so that's not a problem for them. Edit again to remove a few details and say that Mike is not his real name. TL.Dr. New neighbor says we can't share a driveway anymore and ends up with a much smaller drive because of property lines. Now for the next story. Time clock compliance. Going to be a bit vague here as to the job because I still work at this place. After becoming burned out being a tech guy, I had an opportunity to work in a special program in a completely unrelated field, but one that made use of my secondary set of skills. I joined as a member of the department. And, through a series of hilariously cringy actions by the head of the department, ended up being assistant to the director who replaced the director that hired me. He and I got along swimmingly and we rebuilt the entire department to not be a money pit like it was before. Our time clock is web-based, but our internet connection is iffy at the best of times. Sometimes punches go missing or don't even get recorded. I asked for permission to have access to edit punches so the main office, that took forever to make edits, didn't have to deal with it. This was granted and things shaped up even more. As assistant director, I had a guaranteed 40 each week, but was hourly and not salary. Because of the frenetic pace of what I do, punching the clock can be tricky, as I do lots of work before and after scheduled time. I do not mind this because my days are pretty easy in general and my boss and I are very casual in interaction. He trusts me and I wouldn't dare betray that trust. My erratic clock punches began to accrue overtime, and the CFO caught wind of this and gently told me that I cannot get overtime unless it's an emergency or crunch/busy in our industry. After talking with my boss, we decided to allow me to edit my times to get the straight 40 to appease the CFO. 3 years pass and I asked for a raise. Hey, I had been comfortable, but 3 years without a raise seemed a bit much. The CFO grants my raise but tells me that I cannot edit my times, that I have to punch in and out like everyone else. I explain the situation to him, but he's old and set in his ways and says that this is the way things are. I tell my boss, who is not happy about this, but we come up with a malicious compliance plan. I clock in like everyone else, a few minutes before start and a few minutes after for end. These few minutes add up and before you know it, I'm getting at least an hour extra per week. The CFO calls me and says, hey, you can't get overtime. I asked him, on speaker with my boss in the room, who also said hello when I answered, if he wanted me to stand at the clock and wait for exact times to clock in/out. He said that would be acceptable, and my boss said, are you going to pay him time for standing at the clock on company property? CFO was about to say no when I guess his brain jumped into gear and realized he was about to suggest something illegal. I explained that I sent CFO an email explaining that this would happen, copied to my boss, and that he never responded. He was warned and still decided to stick to his guns. Go ahead and edit your times, he says dejectedly. Oh no, sir. He will just keep doing what he's been doing. It balances out because he puts in so much extra work. It's only fair, says my boss. Now I get about an hour of OT and am left alone by the CFO. So glad I'm not on salary. Now for our last story. Call the police? Sure. In our mid-20s my husband and I purchased and moved into our rather modest first house with our infant daughter. I made a big effort to meet and befriend our neighbors and all of them warned me to be careful of one particular person, Jane. Jane had lived on the street for 3 years at this point and had earned herself the nickname Big Fat Jane as she was manipulating, intimidating, and thoroughly awful. Jane ran a daycare from her house, but neighbors on both sides reported hearing her scream at the children and leave them unsupervised in the garden. It's important to note that Jane's partner is a police officer. The neighbors were scared of retaliation if they reported her or stood up to her. It seemed Jane would use this to get away with her horrific behavior. Our house had a driveway with a dropped curb big enough for one car, but we could fit both if you blocked in the first and only used the second car. Parking on the street was very limited and we had double yellow lines outside our house, not allowed to stop/park there. During some essential roof work, our driveway was taken up by scaffolding and a skip, so we parked in the street and my husband parked outside BFJ's house. The next day when he went to his car, BFJ came running down her path shouting at him. She screamed about his antisocial parking, that his car would be towed and that he could expect it to be scratched up if he left it there any longer. My husband calmly explained it was a public road and she had no right to police the space. Her screeches at this point were loud enough that I, and several neighbors heard, and came to see the commotion. Her partner was perched at the door during all of this, saying and doing nothing. When she saw me on pavement with our daughter, she pointed and screamed, "You'll have the social on you if you don't F off. I'll scratch you right up." At this point I told my husband to come back and we were calling the police. She responded, "Call the police. I effing dare you." He's pointing at her partner. "A policeman. He'll effing sort you out. You won't know what hit you." At this point my husband looked at her husband and said, "Is that right? And you're agreeing with what she said?" The partner nodded and said, "You need to move or accept the consequences. You call the police, it won't get you anywhere." Funnily, when I then took out my phone and dialed the non-police emergency number, on speakerphone, and made a police report, both of them looked a lot less confident. BFJ stood there open-mouthed, then grabbed her partner and slammed the door. And we haven't heard from her since. Her partner was placed on suspension due to the allegation, and further allegations from our neighbors. He then returned to an admin role. After our confrontation, BFJ was given a warning for a public order offense. However, due to a number of reports, her daycare closed and she is no longer able to mind children. Their house is up for sale, however, as she made a number of modifications without proper planning or works people, its price is significantly lower than they expected and they're in negative equity. All because of a parking space. That was r/malicious compliance. Let me know what you think of these stories in the comments below. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe and hit the notification bell. I publish new videos daily.